I was reading this week, interesting enough, an interesting story, fascinating true story about this guy named Dennis Waitley. And in May 25th, 1979, Dennis Waitley was traveling from Chicago to Los Angeles because he had a speaking engagement that he was a very important speaking conference that he was at for his company. And so he got off to a late start, flew to the airport in his car, got to O'Hare International Airport. Dennis was incredibly late, and he was running through the airport trying to make it on time. And if you've ever been running through late at O'Hare, it's incredibly difficult, even in 1979, big airport. And so he gets to the gate K5. And he's got his ticket in his hand. He knows he's late. He's ready to board. And as soon as he gets to the gate, the person at the ticket agent there at the ticket counter said, "It's too late. We've already shut the gates to the plane. The plane is about ready to take off." And Dennis was crazy mad. He was like, "I've got to get on this plane. I've got to go to Los Angeles to speak. It's just a little bit of time once I land to go to the place where I'm speaking. I've got to get on this plane." And the ticket agent said, "There's no way. We have a policy here. There's no way we can do it." And he was mad. He took his ticket that he had paid for, slammed it on the counter and said, "You will get me on this plane." They called security to get in the way of what was about to happen. And they have this big argument. As they are arguing, he sees his plane leaving the runway. He is livid. He picks up that ticket that he paid for, and he said, "I'm going to make a complaint. Where do I go to do that?" And they pointed him to an office, a customer service office of American Airlines down farther in the terminal. And so he says, "Okay, I'm going to go complain." And so as he makes his way, he goes down to this office, and there is a line. There's about 20 people in line to get into this office. And so he's waiting, he's fuming, he's furious, and these were the days of no cell phone, so he couldn't even communicate that he was going to miss the flight to the people out in Los Angeles, and he's upset and he's mad, and in about 10 minutes he is waiting. He's only gotten about 3 or 4 people ahead of him, and he's been waiting for about 10 minutes, and true story, on the intercom, at that very moment, they announced that American Airlines 191 from Chicago to Los Angeles, the flight that he was supposed to be on, had issues on the takeoff and had just crashed, killing 258 people, all the passengers. In fact, American Airlines flight 191, killing 258 passengers and crew people, at that moment was the greatest crash in U.S. aviation history. Now you can imagine his response to this. I mean, he was just shook up. He didn't know what to do. He was mixed with all these emotions. He was still angry and upset, but at the same time he was scared and he was sad for those people. And then there was a part of him who was incredibly grateful that he hadn't gotten on that plane. And so he decided, "I am not going to complain." He took his ticket and went home. Rushed home, he opened up the door, he saw his wife and kissed her and hugged her, and he saw his 2 kids and kissed them and hugged them and told them the whole story. Later on that night, he took that invalidated ticket. He went into his home office there in his home and the desk that he would sit at every day, and he opened up the right-hand drawer and he put that ticket inside. And for the rest of his life, when things got tough or when he got discouraged or disappointed in life, he would open up that drawer and he would look at that ticket, and all the gratitude would come back. All the purpose would come back. And I love that story. I'd never heard that story before. And in many ways, that ticket that he kept with him, it was a life symbol. It's what I would call a life symbol, a symbol of bringing meaning. That ticket was a symbol of bringing meaning and purpose to the present in his life and faith for his future. And that's really what we're talking about. That's the whole idea behind this series that we've been in called Altars. As we explore in the Bible these ancient memorials that served as marking points, and they marked significant moments in people's lives where God showed up. And altars in the Bible became this very tangible way for people to connect with God, to remember God, to show their gratitude to God, to worship God. And as we've been saying in this series, I mean, I know it sounds weird and strange, but altars, just like we read in the Bible, can play a significant role in my faith journey and in your faith journey. They just can. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, we need the physical to help us in our faith, right? We need to be able to see. We need tangible things to spur us on in our faith journey with Jesus Christ. Yes, the Bible says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, but sometimes we need to see the evidence, right? Sometimes we just need something to hold on to remind us that God is there with us. And that's what altars do. They give us that ability to do that. And so we've been talking about what modern altars look like, and we've defined it this way as we talk about altars today is a very visible, tangible expression of God's faithfulness and presence in our lives. And again, we're not talking about going to the store and buying some wood or buying some stone and building an altar in your backyard or inside your house. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about altars that are symbols, just like that ticket was for Dennis, a symbol that reminds of God's faithfulness and presence in our lives. And so we've been talking about that. We've looked at the altar of covenant. We've looked at the altar of new beginnings. And today we're going to take it up a notch. We're going to talk about the altar of celebration. The altar of celebration. And this is a big one. Because here's what often happens. I think we get so caught up with this cultural mindset of, what have you done for me lately? Like, that's the mindset that most of our culture has as we live life. What have you done for me lately? We see it in sports. I mean, we see coaches be highly successful, then they have one bad year, and what do? We fire them. He's a bum. We see it in sports. What have you done for me lately? We see it in business. We see it in relationships. We see it in all aspects, in entertainment. See, the problem is most of us in life, we've adopted this, what have you done for me lately? And we're so quick to discard the good that has happened in the past, whether it's rushing ahead because we want the next big thing, we want the next challenge, the next goal, and we've limited our ability to celebrate life's victories well. And this is crucial for us because what happens is this mindset that we've adopted in our culture, what have you done for me lately? It seeps into our relationship with God. It seeps into our faith journey with Jesus. And so we rush. We might say, God, thank you, and a burst of worship, and then we move on with the next thing in our life because we're so busy. We're so looking forward to the next thing in life. And my suggestion and my thinking is that we need to celebrate more. See, contrary to what many people believe, God is not a killjoy. He wants us to celebrate. He wants us to enjoy the moment when there are victories in our lives. In fact, one of the overarching themes of the Old Testament of the Bible, God comes to his people over and over and over again, and he pretty much tells them this: I need you to press pause and celebrate. Press pause and celebrate. That is an overarching theme that you can find in the Old Testament of the Bible, where God continually says, hey, I want you to temporarily stop the forward motion of life so that you can take it all in, take in all my goodness and all my faithfulness and all my power. Press pause and celebrate. And I'm horrible with this. I don't do this enough. My guess is you probably struggle with it too. Press pause. Just temporarily stop the forward motion of your life and take it all in. God's goodness and God's love and God's mercy. You see, when we fail to press pause and celebrate in life, it will create this joyless faith that leads to a disconnected, disappointed, dissatisfied, discontented life. So that's why over and over again we find God encouraging his people, hey, I need you to press pause and take it all in and celebrate. Now some of you, I know what you're thinking. Some of you are probably saying to yourself, but Steve, you don't understand. I'm not in a good place right now in my life. And there's very little cause in my life right now to celebrate. But here's something that we need to understand, a truth that we need to understand and let's seek deep into our souls is that we cannot let what's wrong with us keep us from worshiping what's right with God. I mean, this is so huge. Don't let what is wrong in your life, what the trials and the troubles and the sufferings and the questions and the doubts, don't let those things keep you from worshiping what is right with God. In other words, we need to press pause and celebrate. It's actually what we find God asking his people in a unique situation that they find themselves in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament of the Bible. So if you have a Bible, we encourage you to bring your Bibles. I encourage you to open up to Joshua chapter 3. It will also be up on the screens as well. But Joshua chapter 3, let me just set the scene. Here's what's been happening. God's people, the Israelites, they've been wandering around this massive desert for 40 years, just waiting for the time to occupy this land that God had promised them for what seemed like forever. And they were wandering and wandering and wandering, and finally they get to the edge of the promised land. And what we find in Joshua chapter 1 is the only thing that's standing between them and the realization of this promise of their own land, their own place to settle. The only thing in the way was a body of water, the Jordan River. Now, that may not seem like a big deal for you and for me, but you have to understand the situation the people of God were facing as they come directly right in front of this Jordan River. They can see the other side. This is the promised land that God had been giving them for years. But there was this Jordan River, but it wasn't just the river. You see, days before, the leader of their people, the only leader the people of Israel had ever known, Moses, the great prophet of God, he had just died. They were without a leader. On top of that, no one had ever been to the other side of this river, all except 12 people. Millions of people, only 12 knew that the other side even existed. There were so many questions. Like, who's going to take the lead now that Moses is gone? How will we know where to go once we're over into the promised land? And which territories are we supposed to take and settle? What if the hostile nations prove to be too difficult for us and they defeat us? Should we keep some of our people behind just in case? All these questions, all these uncertainties. But not only that, the River Jordan at that season, at that moment when they were about ready to go into the promised land, the Bible tells us that it was the wet season and that the Jordan River was overflowing into its banks. It was a flooded river. And you have to understand, back in those days, they didn't have boats or kayaks or canoes or bridges or rafts. Getting several million people onto the other side across this flooded river was going to prove to be a challenge, if not impossible. Welcome to the unknown. Welcome to the unknown. We've all been there. Some of us in this room, we're there right now. We all know what it's like. Maybe it's a health issue that hasn't been resolved yet, or a pending move in your life, or maybe the instability or uncertainty of your job security, the uncertainty of how you're going to pay next month's bills, or maybe for you it's waiting on the potential consequences of a bad decision that you've made and you're just in the unknown and you don't know how it's going to play out. I think we can all agree, we all know what it's like to be right on the edge of the unknown. And this is exactly where we find the Israelites in this story in Joshua chapter 3, starting in verse 14, because God shows up just like he always does. In Joshua chapter 3, verse 14, listen to what happens. So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the water below that point flowed on to the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. Get this. Then all the people, millions of them at this point, then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Lord's covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by. They waited there until the whole nation of Israel, millions of them, had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. God showed up in a big way. Now, I think the key to this whole story is the words, the Jordan was overflowing its banks. I think that's so key to this story. The river was flooded. If you've ever been around a flooded river, you know what a challenge it can be. I remember years ago, I led a bunch of teenagers on a mission trip to Oaxaca, Mexico. Deep into Mexico. And we were at a base camp for 4 days. We were there for a total of 9 days. The first 4 days, we were in the city of Oaxaca. And it's a pretty modern city that had all the modern amenities that you and I would probably know, just a little bit different. But we loved the base camp. It was beautiful, beautiful mountains everywhere. It was unbelievable. And then on day 5, we were heading up to the remote villages up in the mountains of Oaxaca to help some churches in the area. There was this one church that Amy, Joe, and I's group went with into this remote village, and they needed a floor for the church they were building. And so we spent 4 or 5 days there doing the concrete, creating concrete from scratch for the floor of this church. And when I say remote, I mean remote villages. We left Oaxaca City and in a pretty much a big pickup truck. There were 20 of us in the back of this pickup truck, okay? And it was about a 5-hour drive to this remote village. And it wasn't like on, 294 or 290 tollway here, okay? This was rocky road. This was no paved roads. This was steep inclines. Incredible. Like there was at least 8 times I thought I was going to die. Like I thought I was going to fall off the truck. But about halfway into this incredible extreme trip up the mountains, we came to this riverbed. And it looked like a pretty significant riverbed. It was the River Salado in Oaxaca. And this Salado River, at the time that we got there, it didn't really seem like a river, a major river. Because it was dry season. The host had said it was the dry season, and it was incredibly dry this year. And so there was just a little stream running through it, probably 6 inches, maybe a foot deep. I mean, it was pretty minor. And we started talking. He says, you know what? Here's the deal, Steve. He says, in about 4 months, it will be wet season. And where we're standing right now, we were on the river bank. Where we're standing right now, we won't be able to stand in 4 months. It will be overflowing with water. In fact, most the villages up in the mountains of Oaxaca, they time it out so that they make all their trips into the big city to get all their supplies for 6 months when it's dry season, when they can actually cross it. And he said, once the wet season comes, they can't cross the river. I'm like, that's bizarre, that's crazy. And he said, also, you need to understand that it's very wet and there's mud there. And so what we're going to need to do is we're going to ask all of you to get out of the pickup truck because they don't want you to sink. And so you're going to need to walk across. And that wasn't a problem. It was a little muddy, but again, it was pretty much just a little stream. And so we all walk across. The truck goes across without a hitch. And we get back into the truck and we start to make our way up. And I remember I'm in the back of this truck. And I'm looking as we're going up into the mountains again, and I just see dry land, and I'm like, that was easy. I can't imagine this river being filled. It's so dry right now. And when we read this story in Joshua, the problem wasn't that it was dry. That wasn't the case. See, what I love about this story is the only way that the people of God were going to cross the Jordan is if God intervened, and that's exactly what happened. God, the almighty, all-powerful God, made a way. He cleared a path. And every time I read this, I think this is one of those only God moments. You know what I'm talking about? Those moments in life where you look back, maybe it's a day or several hours or several weeks or maybe 6 months later, and you can look back and say, that was an only God moment. Only God could have done that. I love when I experience those only God moments in my life. And you might be sitting there saying, I don't know if I've ever experienced that, but I promise you they've happened in your life too. Moments where you recognize only God could do this. Only God could have provided for me in this way. Only God could have made this happen. Only God could have timed it out like that. Only God could have saved me from that danger. It's moments in your life where you say, I can't explain it other than God. God had to have his hand on it or it wouldn't have happened this way. And it's so important in our faith journey, in mine and yours, that we embrace those only God moments. We embrace them. That means we recognize them. We can look in the moment, we can look back and say, that was God. Only God could have made that happen. We recognize it and then we appreciate it and then we press pause and celebrate it. And that's what happens in this story. Look at Joshua chapter 4. It says, when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, who was now their leader, he says, now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. Verse 8, so the men did as Joshua had commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River, one for each tribe, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the place where they camped for the night and constructed the memorial there. There's the altar. Then verse 14, that day the Lord made Joshua, or verse 19, the people crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Then they camped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho. It was there at Gilgal that Joshua piled up these 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. He's building his altar. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, in the future your children are going to ask, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before our very eyes. And he kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea, when he dried it up until we had all crossed over. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever. Now, here's a question I have. Why would God have the people go back into the river? They had already crossed. The miracle had already happened. They were already in the promised land. They were going to party like it was 1999 BC. I mean, this was awesome. And yet God says, wait a minute here. Before you get too crazy about focusing on what's next, I want you to go back into the river, take 12 big stones, and set them up as an altar, as a memorial. I mean, why would God do that? I mean, that took a lot of time and energy. See, I think sometimes we're so quick to forget what God has done in our past because we're thinking about what God is going to do next. And we fail to celebrate crossing the Jordan River because we're so focused on Jericho. Listen, in this story, Jericho is the first thing on the agenda, taking the territory of Jericho. There is no doubt that in this story, Jericho is next. But I don't think they were ready for Jericho until they had the opportunity to celebrate the Jordan. You see, for me and for you, it's true. Until you have celebrated what God has done last, you will not be ready for what God has for you next. And I love verse 23. There's a connection in this memorial. Joshua says this memorial reminds us that the God who parted the Red Sea hundreds of years earlier. He did it again. He did it again in the Jordan River. See, that's what altars do. That's why altars matter in my life and in your life. They remind us that the God who did it before will do it again. The God who provided for me then will do it again. It's the way of celebrating the reality that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I don't know about you, but I forget so quickly what God has done for me in my life. Man, he'll deliver me from something. He'll provide something. He'll do a miracle. He'll provide this only God moment in my life. And then 3 months later, I'll be stressed out again because I've forgotten how powerful my God is. Maybe you're the same way. And an altar of celebration is a reaffirmation for you and for me that the God who got me here is the God who will get me there. See, I find it interesting that the first thing that God has his people do once they enter into the promised land is not, hey, I need you to go get Jericho now. No, it's I want you to set up an altar to remember this moment. Something physical, something tangible, so that you can go back to any point and remember how I cleared a path for you into the promised land. God had them do this because he knew that they would need it. He knew that conquering this promised land was going to be tough, that it wasn't going to be easy, that these nations were ready to defend and fight for this land. You see, God knew that tough days were going to be ahead for his people. He knew that they were going to need something tangible, something physical to keep coming back to and saying, oh yeah, remember when God did that? He'll provide for us again. This nation, these people group of Jericho, man, they're tough and they've got this huge wall. There's no way we can defeat them. No, we need to go back and remember, look at those stones because that's God provided. He made a way to cross the River Jordan. Remember that? We thought it was going to be impossible, and he was there for us then. God knew that they needed something tangible to come back to over and over and over again when they got discouraged in the battle they were fighting. And the truth is, we all have battles. We all have battles to fight. Every one of us in this room, either we're in the middle of some kind of battle in our life, or we've just come through a battle and have survived, but we've just come through it. And some of us, we haven't come through it in a while. Maybe we're not dealing with it now, but just ahead of you is a battle that you may not even know about right now. We all face battles. Maybe your battle is family, and there's constant struggle and tension with some of your family. Maybe it's financial. Maybe it's some addiction in your life, or depression, or your health, or some kind of failure in your life. You see, the point is, we all have these battles in our lives, and an altar of celebration empowers us to live with holy confidence. An altar of celebration, us celebrating, empowers you and empowers me in the midst of a battle to live with what I call holy confidence, where we anticipate that the God who did that will do this, anticipating what the God who has always been there and who works all things together for the good of those who love him are called to his purposes, anticipating what he's going to do next. This certainty that the God who did this before will do it again and again and again, a holy confidence. It's something all of us need in our lives to overcome the battles that we're fighting. And that's why it's important for us that we create these celebration rituals. It's important to press pause and on a regular basis have these rituals where we're celebrating his goodness and what he's done for us. We all have those celebration rituals. It already happens. High five, fist pump. You know, when you watch football, a touchdown dance, a ticker tape parade, a wedding ceremony and a wedding reception, a graduation party. I mean, all of those have one thing in common. They are celebration rituals. It's what we do when we celebrate. They're unique moments and ways to celebrate special times in our lives. I think we have so much in this room to celebrate and to thank God for all his goodness and faithfulness. And so to close out today, I just want to suggest maybe a few ways that you can create your own celebration rituals. None of this is new, but I think it's a good reminder. The first one is this, is to simply just keep a gratitude journal. Keep a gratitude journal. Guys in the room, not a diary, okay? I know that's not very manly, but get a book. Go to the bookstore that we still have a couple of those around. Go to a store and get a book where you can write in it, or download an app on your phone where you can write in it. And every day, okay, you just write down something that you want to celebrate for that day. Okay, you don't need to write long paragraphs of what happened today, but just every day you write something that you want to celebrate, that this is worthy of celebrating. And to be honest with you, some days it's going to be harder than others, but every day get something where you can write down every day something to celebrate. Man, it will do something to your heart and to your soul. Because in those tough moments when you feel like you're losing the battle, you can go back and pick up that journal, or look on your phone, or look on your device, and look at all the things to celebrate where God has been with you through the good and the bad and the ugly. The God who did it before will do it again in my life. See, it's a way of borrowing the spiritual energy from previous successes to have the power to fight your battles that you're in now. I want to encourage you, keep a gratitude journal. Get something that just is used for that. Here's another one, is listen to worship music. I don't know if you do this outside of a Sunday morning, but listen to worship music. Music is powerful. Music moves us and brings out emotions in us that nothing else does. Like, I can hear a song from the 80s, and I can know exactly where I were, or who I was with, or what I was doing, or who I was dating. I can remember exactly where my friends and I were when that song became popular. Like, it brings you back to a very moment, and it brings you emotions of sadness or anger or joy or whatever. Music is powerful. And what we need to do is, I believe God gave us music, and we need to leverage the power of music to celebrate God's goodness. But not just any music. Worship music. Well, what's worship music, Steve? It's music that takes you vertical with God. It takes you vertical with the one who created you, with the one who has forgiven you, with the one who has been faithful to you. Worship music, it's vertical. It's not about me. It's not about my girlfriend or my husband or my wife. It's about God. And here's my challenge to you, to just try it for 7 days this next week. Take 20 minutes every day, set a clock, set a reminder, and for 20 minutes every day, just listen to some worship music. Maybe you're doing other things. Maybe you're cooking dinner. Maybe you're walking the dog. Maybe you're at work and you just have some downtime and you can put on your headphones. But listen to worship music for 20 minutes every day and see what that does for you. I've practiced this for the past 2 years. Every day of my life, Monday through Friday, I take 20 minutes to listen to worship music. And I can tell you, through the good, the bad, and the ugly, there have been times where that 20 minutes was the most important, most exciting part of my day. Songs like Oceans, which we sing around here, got me through a tough season over the last couple years. Every day I would listen to that song. And I celebrated God's faithfulness. A song we sang today, Here For You. I went through a season of 6 months where I listened to that every single day to remind me of God's faithfulness. Take some time and listen to some worship music. If you don't know how to find or download worship music, talk to our worship band. Talk to Kim and the rest of our band. They will set you up with some songs that we even sing here. The final celebration ritual that I think it would be good to create is that we create a cause for celebration for others. And here's what I mean by that, or a better way to say it is, pay it forward. The very things that you are celebrating in your life, that you're writing down saying, man, this is good in my life, be that to someone else. Maybe God's provided for you financially and just in an only God moment. Take that celebration and take it and become a blessing and give to someone else. It gives them reason to celebrate. Maybe it's a friend has listened to you when you needed it and you are so thankful for that and celebrated God's goodness there. Maybe you become the friend who's with someone else and is willing to listen. Maybe you are celebrating, I've been forgiven. I've been forgiven by Jesus. I've been forgiven by my husband or my wife or my best friend. And maybe that's worth celebrating. Maybe you become now the person that goes and forgives someone else. For every one of your celebrations, make an effort, an intentional effort to recreate that for someone else's life. Create celebration rituals. Press pause and celebrate. That's what's happening in this story in Joshua. Now, here's what I love about this story. Is the story of Joshua that we read about. It's a foreshadowing of what Jesus Christ would ultimately do for us on the cross. Two cool things about this story. The word Joshua, the name Joshua, who becomes the leader and leads his people over into the promised land. The Hebrew word means Jehovah saves. The word Joshua, the name Joshua, in the New Testament of the Bible, it's the equivalent of the name Jesus. And not only that, thousands of years later, in that very same Jordan River, Jesus was baptized. They introduced the world to the Savior. You see, this is just a foreshadowing of what Jesus will do for us. Much like Joshua led God's people into their promised land in the face of the unknown, Jesus' sacrifice on the cross paved the way for us to enter our promised land. Jesus courageously conquered his unknown so that you and I could find peace in ours. Because with Jesus Christ, there really is no such thing as the unknown. You see, with Jesus in the center of your life, you can be certain that you will have the power and the strength to fight your own battles. You can be certain that with Jesus, he will never leave you. He will never abandon you. He will always forgive you. You can be certain that with Jesus, you will be able to find freedom from whatever battle you are dealing with in your life. And you will be able to find hope for whatever you're dealing with right now in your life. And so what we're going to do this morning is we're going to end celebrating that. We're going to end with celebrating the greatness of God and his goodness. The band's going to lead us in a song here as we close. It's the new song that we introduced at the beginning. And so I'm going to encourage you in this moment. I'm just going to ask you to stand on up in this moment. The band's going to lead us in that song. And even if you don't know the song real well, it's pretty easy to follow along with. But whatever you're dealing with in life, make the next few moments about celebrating the goodness of God and the words and the power behind them. And so let's get into this, church. Let's really understand what it means to celebrate God's goodness, because it's so important. It's good for our hearts and it's good for our souls. So let's celebrate as the band leads us out.
All right,